So there was this email thread that went viral that has 347,000 views, right? So that's quite a significant number for a relatively small account, right? Someone who just has about 170K on Twitter. He talks about financial research and things. And what he's done here, he's talking about the surge in unemployment and how that's particularly impacting men. So we're going to go here, we're going to share this tab, and let's listen to a bit of his content hint.
Today, I want to talk about something big that's happening across the market here in the US. A couple of weeks ago, some new news came out that unemployment was starting to increase dramatically in a certain cohort. Even though unemployment broadly has been quite steady, that unemployment is men of college graduating age. Why has this been happening? There's a lot of question marks, but largely it seems driven by two things. One, there is an acceleration of unemployment and a slowing up of the economy, and usually that starts in college age kids. But why men? Well, when you look at the cohorts of men and where they actually tend to work, they tend to be jobs that are problem-solving jobs. Think accountants, think consultants, think programmers, etc., right? Whereas women are much more heavily concentrated in nursing, serving the service industry, etc. And those care industries actually are doing quite well. Healthcare is doing quite well in this market. And care industries are also, importantly, not being affected by AI. Those jobs, just to give you a sense, have gone, the unemployment rate for those men has gone from 4% in the last year to 7%. College age women still are at 4%. So dramatic change, and something very important to highlight. Importantly, non-college age men are actually having less unemployment because of immigration being stopped. Low paying jobs, think working at a McDonald's or somewhere else in the industry, maybe a labor job, construction jobs, for example, have been easier to come by for American men. But again, not true for college graduate men. And that AI trend is just getting started. That is critically important. Why does this matter so much? Pretty simple.
Just before we continue, right? So let's just summarize, because he went through quite a lot of information quite quickly. Men are typically problem solvers, right? You're looking to solve problems and you go into typically some level of technical skill type of job. But a lot of useless admin jobs, right? They tend to, useless admin jobs that we thought would be impacted by AI, which are to a certain extent. But a lot of the AI does also impact men, because some of those problem solving jobs, they're implementing a lot of AI agents, right, to help people with their job. So that does eliminate some of those jobs from the entry level positions. And then if women are doing jobs as nurses, service, and healthcare is a very popular niche to get into. Of course, this channel is about careers and the economy, and depends on where you are in your career. But we have an aging population in the West, right? Even though they're importing lots of migrants who are having kids, many of the existing people in the West can't afford to have families, right? The government's taxing you to death. And then on top of that, there's not a good environment in terms of the West, in terms of having kids. So what ends up happening is lots of people, they end up not having kids, and you have an aging population in the UK, throughout Europe, in America, and then even outside of the West, you have the same in Japan, where people not having kids, and there's a low birth rate. Then you have a demand for healthcare because you have an aging population. If you're going to launch a small business, consider doing something like healthcare, right? Now, women are typically working as nurses, services, and healthcare, where you can't necessarily replace that all by AI. They don't have robotics to the same extent you see on the little news articles and the clips you see on social media with these robot arms doing all these things. You don't actually have it to the same extent being implemented right now. So maybe in the future, those jobs could go, but they're not necessarily affected by AI. Now, he mentions the male men who have college degrees in America have an unemployment rate of 4 to 7%, whereas the women who have college degrees have an unemployment rate of around about the average of 4%, right? Which would be the same as the rest of the economy. So men with college degrees are more unemployed than women with college degrees, right? Also, he talked about how there's a white collar recession, but at the same time there's a white collar recession, there's a demand for low paying service jobs. So that's where you see people going into Uber Eats and food delivery and working as in a coffee shop or in a fast food place. So it's not just AI, it's a general slowing economy, and people are spending on low cost goods or just fast food and things like that. And what you see is a demand for people looking for a quick dopamine boost, which would be the Uber Eats and things like that, Netflix, because people are not happy in their lives. They're using all these escapism mechanisms. And one of the obvious things, like I say, would be eating out, going to a coffee shop and things like that. And that's where you see some of the demand for those service jobs or delivery services like Amazon delivery, things like that, because people are just doing that kind of low level consumption.
Historically, men in the 20s generally have a very high propensity, if they are not employed, to create national disorder. It creates populism, protectionism. A lot of the trends we've already been seeing, and accelerates a bit of riots and disequity. So watch that as we move forward. It's a new starting trend. There is a lot of frustration in that younger cohort, as you might imagine, after the last 40 years of increasing inequality. That's likely to increase as artificial intelligence now primarily starts to take jobs out of those people. So look for that conjunction of a new trend that could be a major issue in the coming elections, as well as in economic outcomes going forward. Critically important.
He was mentioning briefly what type of situations does this lead to when you have many men who are outside the job market, particularly young men, right, at a higher rate compared to the rest of the economy. What you're going to have is riots, civil unrest, populism, like as in right-wing populism, or people getting caught up in politics, right? I know a lot about politics, even though I shouldn't. I should just be maybe consumed with my day job when I was working in the industry, or just my immediate social circle. But most people in particular are feeling more isolated, don't have a lot of friends, not a big social life. There's this monotony of life or meaninglessness of life. And when you have that and you don't have a family, you don't have a social circle you're always hanging out with, which I understand because many people can be quite negative these days, or transactional relationships, even among friends. Thoughts on those still trying to climb the corporate ladder in 2020? It genuinely seems asinine, but seeing people I went to uni with on LinkedIn makes me think it's still hope. If we look at this diagram, the July spike in unemployment wasn't driven by layoffs. It was driven by new entrants, mostly young job seekers who are recent grads, especially college-educated men entering a market disrupted by AI. Slowing demand. The system isn't absorbing new men into jobs, it's rejecting men. So many younger men who are college graduates can't even get their, like the people are talking about getting their foot on the property ladder to buy a property. This is like men can't get their foot on the career ladder to start their career because the lower demand to hire new workers is actively impacting them at the more junior level, right? So if you look at July 2025, like what can you see? You can see this green bar here. The green bar is new entrants into the job market, right? But there's many people coming in the job market, but there's not lots of jobs available, right? So there's a significant proportion of the unemployment rate in July 2025, if you can see where my mouse is, right at the end of this graph. The significant proportion of men or significant proportion of unemployment is the new workers coming out of college, right? They can't even get started in a decent job. They get rejected. It's absolutely brutal, right? Because many of these younger men, they're getting rejected by women. You see these statistics that 70% of men are single. And then you see, okay, well, you got quite a high of them who can't even find a job. So they can't find a job, can't find a relationship. And this leads to instability in their income and their personal life. So men, they say we're living in different work worlds when it comes to work, right? So when we've got young men here, it says young men cluster in sectors vulnerable to AI disruption, tech, finance, women dominating healthcare and education, which is more insulated from automation and economic shocks. This occupational split explains why unemployment is rising for men and not women, right? So I think part of this is AI, but also demand, right? Demand is shifting and changing, right? Like I say, a lot of the service sectors, Asian population, that tends to prefer women, tends to prefer what women tend to be, like healthcare and things like that. Not necessarily like a targeted agenda to ruin men's life, like some people tend to think. Maybe that's part of it, but that's not all of it. So, women tend to be retail sector, as you can see here, the top of the graph. You can see the blue is woman and the brown bar is men. So what you tend to see is, okay, women are working in the retail sector, they're working in food services, they're working in healthcare, and you can see the massive gap between men and women here in the healthcare industry, right? So women are like I don't know how these work, but women are significantly more of the healthcare industry compared to men, right? So what ends up happening is those jobs can't be easily automated. So women tend to be doing better than men when it comes to the unemployment rate. And if men are working, as you can see, the brown bar here, men are mainly in business, finance, and admin. Men are in computing and technicals. Men are in construction and manual trades. So when you have that type of dynamic, what ends up happening is those industries are impacted by AI, automation, and things like that, or even lower demand, right? Because he's not taking that into account here. So there's less demand for some of these office jobs, men in finance and things like that. There's a complete downturn in the tech sector. Construction is slowing down because there's lower demand for building new properties because there's tons of properties people aren't buying. So that overall leads to more men being unemployed. And then next up, we have oh, we went through this one. Goes through in a bit of detail through the gender occupational split, right? So men dominate in the physical and technical fields like transportation and STEM. Women are concentrated in services and caregiving roles that are more resilient to AI, right? And you can see this again, women tend to be in sales and then services, which I went through before. And then also, if you look at where men tend to be, STEM careers, transportation, construction, again. So you can see the clear split between men and women in terms of what career path they're in and how this tends to impact men more than women when it comes to unemployment. And women tend to be more in the soft skills like sales and services, people skills. Men tend to be more in those kind of hard skills, technical skills, working in STEM or physical skills, construction, things like that. That's where they tend to be more impacted by the shift is in the economy. Right? So it says, in fields like law and consulting, women now make the majority of junior level workers. The youngest age groups are majority female in things like law and consulting, reflecting a generational shift on who's entering white collar professions. This divide is why tech layoffs and AI disruptions are hitting men harder. Men are losing ground to AI, but to women in rising, stable, competitive fields. And in my opinion, a large part of this is DEI. This isn't AI, right? So if you've got more women going into some of these highly valued, high status jobs, careers, management consulting careers, that's not, AI is not creating that, right? That's because these companies, whether they want to admit it or not, under DEI and even before DEI, through gender equality hires, they want to have a bias of hiring more women because they already have a lot of men, the older men at more senior levels. And based on that gender bias, it negatively impact younger men, right? So older men had the good life. They had maybe a bias slightly favoring men over women. And now all the younger men are suffering for that. Younger men can't get jobs because you have a DEI impact, gender equality hiring to benefit women. So you have more women in a lot of these legal and management consultant jobs at the junior level. They're up to 60 to 70%, right? Roughly. Yeah. That's a massive shift. Women are going from 40% all the way from, in previous generations, women were 40% of the legal department, 40% of consultants, and now they're 55% to 70% of the legal department or the management consultant department. And I noticed how vigorously they were supporting hiring a lot of women, particularly white women, in a lot of these roles. Since 2015, men and participation rates have diverged significantly. Men have increased their role in the workforce by less than 1%, 0.5%. A woman have increased 4%. And you see this very vividly in the corporate environment, how bias is in favor of women by pushing them into preferential hiring, preferential promotions. And that doesn't advantage men in any way, right? It's just essentially creating a heavy bias in favor of women. The system is pulling more women in the workforce, right? While men's workforce is staying the same. Now we have the rise of the disengaged male, which would be the MGTOW male maybe, or the incel black pill, whatever the term they want to use for these type of guys. The rise of the disengaged male. Since 1970, the share of young adult men not even looking for work has more than doubled. Today, 11% of men aged 25 to 40 are outside the labor force entirely. This isn't just unemployment, it's withdrawal. And I think this is a good point here, right? Men have basically withdrawn from the workplace in a very real way. Many men are told, go to college, it's fine. You basically, be a job, but it's no longer a safety net for men. So it's a safety net for women in a sense, but not a safety net for men. Young male college grads are now unemployed at the same rate as men without degrees. So you can do all the right things and go and get a college degree, and then you're still treated the same way as someone who didn't get a degree. You can see the graph here, right? So he says male college grads are unemployed at the same rate as men without degrees. For women, college still provides a clear advantage versus not going to college. AI is wiping out the kind of jobs that college educated men used to count on, right? Which I went through at the start of the video, tech jobs, things like that. And then see if you have the AI taking some jobs, let's just say in tech and finance or consulting, then on top of that, you have a bias favoring hiring women, then obviously that's going to have it's a double bias against men, right? So college degrees doesn't help you get a job anymore. So many men are thinking, what's the point? Why take on that debt? And then there's the graph, right? So young male college grads are now jobless at the same rate as non-grads. And AI is kind of, I don't think it can be blamed on AI. I think it's overplaying the role of AI, to be honest. Like I said, there's other biases against men. Then we've got here, a rise in graduate unemployment is concentrated amongst men. Unemployment is climbing for the recent, all of that increase is among young men. Young women with degrees are seeing no similar spike. The job market is shifting in ways that disadvantage educated men, right? So you got millions of men. I know there's so many different statistics about how many men are unemployed, particularly in the US. I think it's 5 million, 7 million unemployed men not looking for jobs. What will they do, right? Are they going to, like I say, get involved in civil unrest, things like that, become radicalized in one way or the other? So many different ideas there. Say 2023, 2024, you see a massive rise in men being unemployed. And I think about this in society, people I deal with in real life and things like that. There definitely was a pickup also with Andrew Tate and content like that. And I always think, like, why did that happen? Why did Andrew all of a sudden blow up around 2020, 2022, I think, right? I think partly it was a good marketing strategy and short clips on TikTok, but partly it was so many men hitting a brick wall in their life time and time again, unemployment, relationship breakups, divorce, all this constant media bias against them. So what we can see here is he says the unemployment rate for 16 to 24 is rising faster than any other age group. Older workers are more insulated, but the youngest cohorts are getting hit hard. Young people are entering a job market that's few opportunities and more automation. Yeah, so you can see it here, right? So these different lines denote different age, right? So if you're older, 55 years and old, gray line, you can see it's kind of low and not many unemployed people there compared to others. Green is the youngest. You can see it rapidly increasing, the green line going up in terms of unemployment, which is people who are 16 to 24 years old. And then if you're 25 to 54, there also is an increase, but not at the same rapid rate. Look how quickly the green line's going up around July 2025 at the end of the graph, right? So that means more and more young people are becoming unemployed, right? So the tough reality for young men, I think men were set up to fail in this system. This system set up so many traps, lies about the economy, lies about gender dynamics, lies about what's good for your health and what's not good, lies about pretty much everything. And then and particularly younger men who are brought into this really brainwashing throughout the education system and biases and hiring against them. So after a point, it just ends up reaching, ends up having an impact. Don't have a failure to start, they set up to fail, right? The economic challenges and influences on the workforce reduction. And the point I'm trying to make here is not just AI creating job losses. Let's not blame everything in the world on AI. So what's creating AI? What's creating economic challenges, right? Or less people being hired. So we have 34% of the reason why people aren't being hired is because of challenges, because the economy is slowing down. They're similar to 27% and 24% at the top row. You can see here, the market shifts lowering demand, right? Then you have adjustment to the current demand. So basically there's slower economy, so less people are being hired, including more graduate workers, right? Then it says all these 20% really are saying we're improving processes, we're restructuring and downsizing, staff are leaving on their own cases, on their own initiative, and they're not replacing people who are leaving. Some jobs are being automated, skill changes are occurring, and then project-based roles are ending, right? They have a project and then it ends. The point I'm trying to make here is that there's many different reasons why there's a decline in hiring for people. And it's not all AI. You have a slower economy. You have basically teams that are changing to work more efficiently based on what they're saying. So that's leading to job losses, and they're just not hiring as many people back. They're like, okay, well, we've had some job losses. We don't want to hire people back. The economy is slow. If we're having people leaving the company, let's not replace them. What's the point, right? You know me, and I work as a career coach, right? And I have different clients to deal with specific niche circumstances, whether it's finding a job, increasing their salary, dealing with internal office politics, getting promoted, all these type of things, right? So if you want to win more in this kind of difficult economy, You want to learn the unspoken rules, right? And protect your reputation, deal with this difficult scenario where all tend to be dumped in, right? And you want to set clear boundaries with co-workers, which we're going to come on to next in this next segment. And you want to earn your respect through smart strategy, right? Both in the economy, in your job search, dealing with different co-workers, dealing with this kind of broken social dynamic you have to deal with at work so you don't get cancelled and you can actually progress and craft a very successful career. So if you're interested in that, there's a pinned comment. Check that. If you click on that, you can link, you'll get to this page. You click this link, you can schedule a call with me and we can get started with really helping your situation so you don't end up like many people do end up in this crazy economy falling behind.